We've already talked about what to do with the amplitude and the period when we're dealing with sine and cosine, but today we're going to look at what to do with horizontal and vertical shifts. So before, the general equation we talked about was just y equals a sine of bx or y equals a cosine of bx. But now we're adding more letters, c and d. So just a reminder for the first one, amplitude is always the absolute value of A. The period is found by doing 2 pi over B. But then there's the new ones. So first of all, C involves the horizontal shift. But just like to find the period, we actually have to do some work. To find the horizontal shift, we have to do some work. So we actually have to do C divided by B to find the horizontal shift. And that can be to the left or to the right. And this may feel backwards, but if we are subtracting the C, then that means we're moving to the right C over B. If we're adding C, that means we're moving to the left C over B. Again, that may feel a little bit backwards, but subtracting means we're moving to the right, adding means we're moving to the left. Now, D is the vertical shift. That's when we're moving up or down. It's very straightforward. Plus D means we're moving up D units. Minus D means we're moving down D units. So the vertical shift is about as straightforward as it can be. And then there's also the midline. We talked about the amplitude being how far above and below the midline we go. Well, we can, with these, actually find out what the midline is. The midline is always horizontal, so it's y equals, and it's y equals d. So if our d is plus 2, then the midline is y equals 2. Or if the midline, if it's minus 3 at the end, then the midline is negative 3. Okay, now let's put all this together and see if we can look at an equation and describe all these things. So to determine the amplitude, the period, and the shifts for this equation. Okay. So first of all, the amplitude. Amplitude is the absolute value of A, which is the 4. So the amplitude is 4. The period is 2 pi over B. We find our B right here. So that's 2 pi over 2, which means it's pi. So that's stuff we've done before, amplitude and period. But now we see we have this C. It's a C because it's inside the parentheses. C is anything added or subtracted inside the parentheses. D is anything added or subtracted outside the parentheses. So here we are subtracting. So if you remember, subtracting means we're moving to the right. And to figure out how far we're moving to the right, we do C, 2 pi over 3, divided by B, which is 2. So I know it's your favorite, dividing fractions and all that. We need to treat this like a fraction over a fraction. And to divide by a fraction, we have to multiply by the reciprocal. Well, if you notice, the 2's cancel out. So on top we have pi, and on the bottom we have 3. So this tells us we have a horizontal shift where we are moving to the right, pi over 3. And there is no vertical shift here because there's nothing being added or subtracted outside of the parentheses. Okay, next example, we want to determine the amplitude, the period, and the shift for this function. And as far as the directions, that's going to be the same for all of these, so don't feel like you have to rewrite determine amplitude, period, and shift every time. That's going to be the directions for all of these. So you can save some time, just write the equation. So stuff we've done before, amplitude, that's 3, coming from A right here. Period, two pi over B. This is our B right here. So that again goes down to pi. But our shift this time is going to be to the right because we're subtracting. But we have to do C over B. So again, we need to treat this like a fraction over a fraction. And to divide by a fraction, I multiply by the reciprocal. So this time, I find that we are shifting to the right pi over 6. So we've identified the amplitude, we've identified the period, and we've identified that it shifts to the right pi over 6. And there is no vertical shift on this one either because there's nothing being added or subtracted outside of the parentheses. Okay, next up we have 1/2 cosine x plus 1. The directions are the same as before. We want to identify the amplitude, the period, and any shifts that are happening. So for the amplitude, that's 1/2, coming from right here. For the period, we just get 2 pi over 1 because the understood coefficient in front of x is just 1. So my period is 2 pi. Now, we see this plus 1. Notice it is not inside parentheses. If they mean for it to be inside parentheses, they have to write parentheses. So there are no parentheses. This tells you this is outside the parentheses, which means it is a vertical shift. This is the letter D if you look back at the original equation. So since it's plus, that tells us it's moving up. And it's moving up 1 unit. So this has an amplitude of 1/2, a period of 2 pi, and it is being shifted up 1 unit. All right, let's bring it all together now. This has everything. It's got an amplitude, it's got a period, it's got a horizontal shift, and it's got a vertical shift. So all this stuff put together. So first of all, if we have y equals 2 cosine of 4x plus pi, and then 2 subtracted from that, our amplitude will be 2. That's coming from this 2 right here. Our period is 2 pi over 4. Because remember, it's always 2 pi over b. We can reduce that to pi over 2. Okay, now for the shifts. One thing I really should have been writing all along is the word shifts in front of these. So it's shifting to the left, and I know that because it's plus this time. So whenever minus is to the right, plus is to the left. So it shifts left, C over B. And thankfully this time I don't have to do any simplifying. I don't have any fractions inside of fractions. So this shifts to the left, pi over 4 units. And the minus 2 tells me it shifts down 2 units. So I have all the things there. The amplitude, the period, a horizontal shift, which by the way, horizontal shifts can also be called phase shifts. So like this. So if you see in our book or anywhere else it says the phase shift, that's the same thing as a horizontal shift. So it has a horizontal or a phase shift moving to the left pi over 4, and it shifts down 2 units. So that's how we can look at a sine or cosine equation and determine its amplitude, its period, and its shifts. So if you're in my classroom, not just watching me randomly on YouTube, this is the homework. The instructions will tell you need to graph it. Don't. Just tell me what we've been doing on these examples. Just tell me the amplitude, the period, and the shifts. You do not have to graph it when it comes to the shifting. Just describe the shifts, the amplitude, and the period. Good luck.